3 of my post-race startups lessons from the Trail of the Western States 100. So if you've been listening to past episodes, I'll keep this really short. What I've been doing both pre-race from the Western States 100 Ultramarathon and post-race is recording a number of lessons from the trail, things I've learned both in the lead up to and the training preparing for the race, and then based on my experience actually running the race, thinking about what are the lessons that am taking from the trail and how do they apply to startups and running and growing and ramping and scaling a startup every single day. So I've always talked about how going from idea to impact is really this long journey that every startup founder and their team is going through. You go from this genesis of an idea like, hey, I ought to start a company that solves this problem, all the way through to the place where you're making an impact for your customers in your market. And while it feels like a sprint all of the time, sprinting on products, sprinting on sales, sprinting on hiring, sprinting on capital raising, every step along the way is really just a step on a very long journey, which feels much like an ultramarathon, it's much more representative in my mind of an ultramarathon, that long journey that you're on as a startup founder, than it is a sprint. So what I'm going to do is pick up on installment number 3 of my post-race lessons from the trail. So I've covered 6 post-race lessons so far. So we're going to do 7, 8, and 9 today, and then I'm probably going to leave number 10 for a separate recording, a separate LinkedIn Live or podcast, however you are consuming this, or maybe you're watching on YouTube as well. By the way, if you haven't checked out what we do at SalesQualia, I mean, obviously everything we do here is focused on helping those startup founders on that journey that you're on, helping you get out of that startup mode and into ramp up and scale up mode. And everything we do here is focused on building systems, getting you more predictable, more repeatable, more scalable sales processes. So if you're at a place on that journey that you're on, if you're on that ultramarathon as a startup founder, climbing the mountain to make the impact that you want to make, and you feel like you might need a little bit of help, or even just want to get some perspective on where you are and what's next in that journey, what should be your next steps, then I definitely invite you to just shoot me an email, or if you're watching this on LinkedIn, you can shoot me a DM. You can also just write the word journey and there's a comment down below, and that will let me know that you just want to have a quick chat. What we'll do is take a look at your situation, figure out if or how we can help you out, maybe brainstorm some ideas in the short run, and then talk about building out a sales plan of action for you that is akin to helping you map out those stages or steps along the way on your journey. If you're listening to this to the podcast, or you just want to shoot me an email, you can also shoot me an email at scott@salesqualia, QUALIA.com, scott@salesqualia.com. Just write the word journey in the subject line. That'll just let me know we have a quick chat about your situation, brainstorm ideas, and then we can figure out if or how the team and I here can help you out. So that's it now for now on the intro. Let's jump into lessons from the trail, and number 7 and 8 I'm actually grouping together, because if you've been listening to the previous episodes, I've talked a lot about preparation and all of the work that goes into the race itself, as well as the importance of getting help, having pacers in my case on the race along the way to help move me through the course, especially in the later stages, into the evening, into the night, all the way through the night into the morning. Now what we're going to talk about is a lot of the actual in-race situations that I encountered, with all the planning, all the training, all the preparation, all the help, everything that went into it. Now it's just like you're in the race and you're doing it. And so number 7 and 8, I'm going to cover these together. Number 7, in my notes I wrote down, give it everything. And number 8 is run your perfect race. Run your perfect race. Emphasis on your perfect race. So let's talk about this a little bit in context of the race, and then we'll map this into lessons for startup life. So as I've talked about a couple times, here's, if you're watching this on YouTube or on LinkedIn, you can see this is the full course, starting up at Squaw Valley, USA, Olympic Valley, and then working its way up and down, and eventually down to Auburn, California, over the course of 100.2 miles. And one of the things that I did in preparation, as I've talked about before, is I've prepared on what I called a pace card. So this is just a list of all of the aid stations, all the checkpoints along the way, and what time I expect it to be hitting those checkpoints in order to hit my personal goal of a sub 24-hour time. I wanted to finish this race, finish the 100.2 miles in under 24 hours to earn the Silver Buckle Award. The race allocates you up to 30 hours to finish, which is also a big accomplishment, a huge accomplishment. And that was certainly a goal of mine. Further, I wanted to also make sure to give my best chance to break the 24-hour barrier and earn that silver buckle award. So this pace card is something I built out based on my training times, based on my experience on the course, running over the course of years, different parts of this course, knowing the terrain, knowing where it's going to be slow because I'm climbing and because it's going to be hot during the middle of the day. Other places where I feel like I should be able to move a little bit faster because it's nighttime or it's a downhill section. And when this idea of like give it everything and run your perfect race, these two lessons is really just about like once I'm in the race, you just got to like trust your training and do what you know is you're capable of and give your all. Like don't hold back. I mean, there's a certain amount of pace that you have to hold back on. You can't just go out and try to sprint up the first 2,500 feet on the mountain. But there's certainly times where I know like, hey, there's times I got to push the pace. There's times where I've got to keep moving on this climb. There's no reason to stop at any point. And regardless of what happens along the way, there's this need to make these micro adjustments to what it means to run my perfect race. And so what I've got here in front of me here is both a copy of the pace card as well as the official Ultra Live timing. So there's a timing mechanism on your bib that beeps as you cross into each aid station. There's also somebody recording your bib number manually just so they can time what time you're coming into those checkpoints. And then sometimes they also time what time you're leaving those checkpoints. And so for me, when it means like giving everything and running my perfect race, when I look at, reflecting back over the race, one of the things to me that I'm really proud of is that, the times that I expected to hit these aid stations along the way and the actual times, especially through the first, 60, 70 miles are eerily spot on. So a little bit early in the race, I was a little bit ahead of schedule. So for example, I expected to hit what's called Lion Ridge, which is the first big aid station at 7:50 a.m. I actually got there at 7:38 a.m. So a little ahead of schedule. I had a little bit of buffer time. Red Star Ridge, I wanted to be there at 9:10. I got there at 8:59. All the way through to a place called Robinson Flat, which is the first 30 miles of the race. And this is the first 30 miles are in what's known as the high country because you're at roughly 7,000 feet or above. And so it's big, it's open, it's higher in the elevation. And hitting that time at Robinson Flat, I knew from working with my coach, talking to other racers that have done this race before, I knew that I wanted to hit Robinson Flat. At the latest, I wanted to be out of Robinson Flat by 12:30. That would be 7.5 hours into the race for the first 30 miles. In what is some of the more rigorous parts of the trail. You're doing a couple of big climbs. The terrain is pretty rocky. Even on the downhill sections, it's hard to move quickly, as quickly as you would be able to if it's nice, soft, pine needles on the trail. And so for me, I had my time allocation. I wanted to hit Robinson Flat and get out of Robinson Flat by 12:30. Well, I hit Robinson Flat at 12:22. And I spent about 6 minutes in that aid station. I was out of that aid station just before 12:30. So the first third of the race, I'm looking at my pace card and I'm looking at my time and feeling, kind of doing a diagnostic of how I feel. And I'm feeling like, okay, I feel good. Like I feel pretty strong. And so these next checkpoints, again, it's like my next checkpoint was Miller's Defeat. I wanted to be there at 1:15. My actual time was 1:14. Dusty Corners, 2 p.m. I was there at 1:55. Last Chance, which is about mile 43. Wanted to be there at 3 p.m. I hit there at 2:57. Devil's Thumb, which is the middle of the race course, getting up to mile 47. It's a big, long climb in the middle of the day where the heat was hitting 100 degrees plus. Wanted to hit Devil's Thumb at 4:20. Actually wanted to be out of Devil's Thumb at 4:20. I checked into Devil's Thumb at 4:22, spent about 4 or 5 minutes there, was out of there before 4:30. And so like all of these the first half of the race, I'm almost exactly spot on. I wanted to be down at a place called El Dorado at 5:20. I checked in there at 5:27, so a little bit behind schedule. But I'm nailing this. Like I'm giving it everything I've got, but I'm also throttling back so I'm not overcooking myself. And but this is where the race really started to chip away at me. I could feel the pressure of time because as much as I had this pace card, I also knew if you could see this pace card, my pace card was designed, like I had absolutely positively no room for error, meaning that my pace card had me hitting the finish line specifically at 4:59 a.m., which would bring me at 23 hours and 59 minutes. So I literally had absolutely no room for error if I was going to have a chance of breaking 24 hours. And I knew this. This is just like physical limitations. I'm only so fast. I could only train so hard. I could only do so much preparation. It was my first time doing this race. So I knew that, for everything to happen, for me to hit that sub 24 hour time, it was going to have to be a absolutely perfect race. And so coming into El Dorado at 5:27, spending a couple minutes there, and then having a big long climb, my next checkpoint was Michigan Bluff. And this is where I could feel the race course starting to kind of chip away at me, because I got to Michigan Bluff at 6:28. I wanted to be there at 6:15. And that's when I started to realize, like, I might be in trouble here. I think the course is starting to kind of, take these very vital minutes away from me, because I just wasn't moving quite fast enough. And then the last big checkpoint in the first 2/3 of the race is hitting Forest Hill, which is mile 62. And I wanted to be to Forest Hill. I wanted to be out of Forest Hill by 7:40 p.m. In my best case scenario, I thought, well, maybe I can get out of there at 7:30 p.m. because I knew from my training, I had done this run from Robinson Flat to Forest Hill. I'd done those 32 miles, and I'd done those in training in 6 hours and 45 minutes. There's lots of data I'm throwing at you, but this is the way I, very specific around the analytics behind what does it take to hit this outcome. And you can start to think about, yourself as you're running a startup. You know that, as we talked about before in the previous episode, Vinod Khosla, who talks about the importance of, like, there's out of 10 variables of success for a startup, 5 are what the startup does, 2 or 3 are what the competitors do, and the last couple are based on just pure luck. And so I knew there were certain variables that I could control and certain variables that might be out of my control. And in this case, the weather was one of those variables that was out of my control. With the temperature hitting 100 degrees plus in the canyons, it was just a historically hot day out there. So in that training run I had done from Robinson Flat to Forest Hill in 6 hours and 45 minutes, and it was a cooler day. So my thinking was, well, if I could do Robinson Flat in 7 hours, that's pretty aggressive, but maybe, just maybe I could get there. Well, it turns out I couldn't get there in 7 hours. I checked into Forest Hill right, the time here on the official race time is a little bit off because I actually met my crew just before the checkpoint in Forest Hill. So I ended up getting to Forest Hill around 7:50 or 7:55 p.m. So now I'm about 15 minutes behind my race schedule, my pace card, and based on some historical analysis that I've talked about in a previous runner had actually done some analysis from a previous year's race on what he called frontier times. Like, at what point do you have to be at a certain checkpoint in order to have a chance of a high probability chance of hitting, or a probability of over 50% of hitting that sub 24 hour time. For me, getting out of Forest Hill, I knew, like, basically my drop dead time getting out of Forest Hill was 8 p.m. because that would give me 8 hours. Is that right? 9 hours, 9 hours from 8 p.m. to midnight, and then midnight to 5 a.m., 9 hours to do the last 38 miles. So I actually left Forest Hill right at 8:02 p.m. So even there, like, I'm running this race, I've gone 62 miles, and I knew I was up against it. And you could see some analogies here, I'm sure, as you're thinking about your company, where you set certain checkpoints along the way for yourself. It could be around sales, it could be around product releases, it could be around number of customers, or big company logos. And you could sort of feel like, okay, we're making progress. You could be halfway through the year, and you could look at your revenue numbers and say, okay, we really wanted to hit $3 million of annual recurring revenue by December of this year. Right now we're at mid-year, and we're tracking for like 2.5, which isn't bad, right? It's, maybe you did $1 million last year and you want to hit 3 this year. You want to make that big jump from 1 million to 3 million in order to really start to get some scale in your sales process and in your revenue growth. And so maybe midway through the year, you're at like 2.5 million, and you're saying, like, man, like we're kind of on, like, we made a huge amount of progress, but we're still off. Maybe 1 or 2 of those big deals you thought were going to close in Q2, all of a sudden got pushed off, or maybe a deal that you thought was going to be open. Maybe a big company was considering leaving some big competitor, and you thought maybe there's an opportunity to sell to them, and the competitor or the company, the prospect decided, like, what, actually what we're going to do is stick with the old platform for another 6 months and come back to this in 2022. And now you're like, oh man. So you know yourself, a lot of times as you're hitting these checkpoints along the way for your startup, that the room for error is actually really small. 1 or 2 deals could really make a difference. Or maybe you thought that big conference is going to be a huge opportunity for you to fill the top of the funnel. So you invested in the booth and you invested in getting people to the conference, or whether it's online or in person. And what you thought was going to generate, maybe 20 or 30 highly qualified leads, and only generate 5 or 6. Again, not bad. You got 5 or 6 good leads that are turning in opportunities that you think you might be able to convert at 50% or better by the end of the year. But you're like, it's not the 10 or 15 or 20 we were expecting to get. So that's kind of like how I was feeling. I'm like, man, I'm still making huge amounts of progress. And the way I also knew I was making huge amounts of progress is, if you're watching this, you can see one of the things that the race does is also track your place individually relative to the field as you're going through these checkpoints. So my entire strategy was based on moving conservatively through the early third of the race, the high country, making sure I got to Robinson Flat feeling good, feeling relatively fresh as you can feel after running 30 miles. And then I knew the middle third was the canyons, and it was going to be hot. It was going to be middle of the day. There's a couple of big climbs where you're climbing up 1,500 feet once, and then the next time you're going up 2,000 feet, and the third time you're going up another 1,000 feet. And it's just going to be slow going, and it's going to be middle of the day. So I knew, like, okay, I'm going to have a good, strong, solid first third of the race. The middle third of the race, I knew it was just going to take me a while. I was going to be patient, not try to overcook things. There were some downhill sections there where I knew I could make up some time because the trail was pretty generous in that there's not a lot of rocks. It's actually pretty runnable. I was feeling pretty good about all that. And I thought, like, okay, if I can get to Forest Hill at 7:30 at best, then I got a shot. I got a shot at doing this. But now leaving Forest Hill at 8 o'clock, those 30 minutes I knew could very well be the difference of me hitting the sub 24 time or not hitting this 24 time. But leaving Forest Hill, this is where, here's that quote from Vinod Kosa. I just have a slide here. I always tell startups to hang on long enough to give luck a chance. If there are 10 factors in success, 5 depend on what you do, 3 depend on luck, 2 based on competitors. I think I switched the competitors and luck in my monologue there just a moment ago. So I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, the weather has been really hot. I'm coming out of Forest Hill. Here's a picture of me with my pacer, Dan, that I picked up at Forest Hill. And I knew, okay, I'm a little bit behind schedule. I also knew it's not out of the realm of possibility. I still got 9 hours to do the last 38 miles. The next section of the course is very runnable. The last 38 miles overall is very runnable as compared to the first 62. I've got a pacer. It should be cooling down at some point. It's now 8 o'clock at night. And the problem is, even at 8 o'clock at night, it was in the 90s. So it still didn't cool down. But I'm thinking, I still got a shot, right? I still got a shot here. And so I'm going to continue to give it everything I've got going down the trail. And so Dan and I left the aid station at Forest Hill, left my wife and my son there, who met us and helped me get refueled and retooled and filled up my running pack and my bottles. And off we went. And I said to Dan, look, man, like, this is the place where we got to make up some time. So what I want you to do is every mile, when we click off a mile, I want you to check your Garmin and tell me what pace did we run that mile. Because I knew in that section I needed to be running 12 and 13-minute miles in order to chip away some of that time that we were behind. And so we're running down the trail, and every mile Dan's yelling out, okay, this mile, we just did that one in 12:28. The next mile, 13:08. This next mile, 13:33. So I knew, I was like, okay, like, we're under that threshold of the total, by the way, the total time to run sub 24 hours, you have to run a total of a 14-minute, 22-second pace per mile over the 100 miles. So I knew that as like my benchmark. I got to be running, better than that pace in order to chip away at the time that I lost in that middle third of the race. And so as we're going through the aid stations, the other thing I asked Dan to do is, like, look, when we get to an aid station, This is in the pacer manual that I wrote up for him. What I want you to do is every 30 seconds, I want you to tell me 30 seconds, 1 minute, 90 seconds. We want to try to be in and out of those aid stations in under 90 seconds if possible, certainly under 3 minutes. That was kind of like our big ways of hopefully chipping away time. Because you get to an aid station after running 5 miles or 6 miles or 7 miles, you're a little beat up, you're a little bit drained. There are usually chairs there, they have food, they have water, and it's easy to say, okay, I'm just going to take a quick break. And so from a mindset standpoint, you got to say, no, like these are just checkpoints along the way where I'm going to get some water, I'm going to get some fuel, I got to keep moving. And so again, having somebody like that, having a pacer who just says like, hey, we got to that first aid station. He's like 30 seconds, 60 seconds. And then I remember at that first aid station, he said, all right, we've been here 90 seconds. We got to go. And so we filled up my stuff and got out of there and started moving down the trail again. And so this is like examples of what I'm saying, like give it everything you've got. Even though I knew I was up against it, I knew my probability at this point was probably under 10% of having a chance of a sub 24. I still wasn't going to give up. I told Dan, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going hard until it's absolutely out of the realm of possibility, and then we'll adjust. And that's part of that second lesson I'm talking about of running your perfect race. Because if you just think about the last 18 months that most companies have experienced, every company frankly has experienced with the global pandemic, there are going to be shocks to the system. And whether it's a pandemic or a macroeconomic recession or something that happens in your industry, there's going to be things that are going to introduce themselves as obstacles or obstructions that were just unpredictable and they're out of your control. That's why previous lesson I talked about focus on your locus. Like what's in your control, what's not in your control. And so for me, when I think about running that perfect race and giving everything I've got, I'm just going to keep going for as long as I can. And then if I realize like it's just physically going to be impossible to break 24 hours, well, then I'm going to run the next version of my perfect race. I'm going to make adjustments and say, well, if I can't make it in under 24, what is the next adjusted benchmark or the next adjusted time that I want to get to? And so as we're going down the trail and we're coming out of the first aid station following Forest Hill, which is called Cal 1, the next aid station is called Cal 2. And this is where I think it's really important to take a look at some of the times, because as we pulled into Cal 2, and again, I'm going to show my screen here, so if you're listening in, what I'm showing is going back to the tracker of my times, what times I'm hitting each aid station, and also tracking what is my overall race pace. Well, when we got to Cal 2, which is mile 70.7, so I'm now 71 miles into the race, we actually did chip away at my total race pace. So I left Forest Hill with my race pace at 14 minutes and 32 seconds. So I was behind that 14:22 benchmark that I needed to hit. And I knew in this section I needed to be chipping away and bringing that time down. And we actually did that. We got to Peachstone and I was averaging 14:21. So I was just under the benchmark. And so, that gave us a little bit of hope, but I also knew, looking at my total pace and total time, that the next sections, even though they were more runnable than the first 70 miles, there were some climbs that were going to slow me down. And I was starting to feel like, and I even said to Dan, I think I got bad news, man. I don't think a sub 24 is going to be possible. This is about 10 o'clock at night. And, to Dan's credit, and I appreciated this about him, and he said, his response to me is, yeah, you're right. Like there's no sugarcoating on this. It wasn't, Dan being Pollyanna and saying, no, man, like we can make it. You can do it. We knew the reality at this point. So we're at, 10 o'clock at night. I've been running for now 17 hours. And a moment had hit me where I looked at the time, I looked at the clock, I looked at my pace, and I knew what was ahead on the course for the last 30 miles. And I knew at that point, breaking 24 hours was all but gone. It was all but gone. And I expected to feel some sadness there. I expected to feel some level of frustration, some disappointment. But for whatever reason, while there was certainly a sentiment of disappointment, I also knew that I was having my perfect race. Like I knew and I even said to Dan, I was like, dude, I feel like I've been throwing haymakers at this course all day. Like I was remembering my pace card and remembering what times I was hitting those aid stations in those first 30, 40, 50 miles. I'm like, I'm hitting pretty much every time I expected to hit. Like I'm running my perfect race. And those few minutes that the course kind of chipped away from me in that middle third from Robinson Flat through the canyons, getting into Forest Hill, it just was enough. It was enough little chips on the heel or nicks on the heel or nicks on the legs where I'm like, I'm giving this thing everything I've got. And I knew going in, I was going to have to run an absolutely perfect race to have a chance at 24. And I knew I'd given it everything. I don't feel like I had any errors on the course. I was as quick as I could through the aid station, all of the aid stations. I was keeping up with nutrition, keeping up with hydration, keeping up with my salt. I was passing people. If you look at this Ultra Live tracker at Red Star Ridge, I was at place 197 out of 300 plus competitors. And again, I'm not out there running against other people, but it's an indicator for me as to, am I running the race I expected to run for myself? Am I running my perfect race? I knew I had to throttle back for those first 30 miles, and I did. I got into Robinson Flat, and I was at place 159. So at Red Star Ridge at mile 16, I was at 197. At Robinson Flat at mile 30, I'm at 159. So I knew that I had been passing people through that section. I knew that I was feeling good. By the time I got down to El Dorado Creek, I was at place 98. So now by El Dorado Creek, midway through the race at mile 53, I was now in the top third plus of runners. And by the time I got to Forest Hill, I was at place 85. So I knew. And then that section that I was running with Dan from Forest Hill through Cal 1, through Cal 2, all the way down to a place called Rucky Chuck, which is where the river crossing is at mile 78, we were passing people. Now, again, I'm not there passing people and feeling like, oh, I'm beating that person. But it's telling me like my pace is, I'm running the right pace. I'm running the right race. I'm running my perfect race. And so at that moment when I told Dan, I'm like, look, man, it's not going to happen. And he said, yeah, you're right. It wasn't nearly as disappointing as I thought it was, because I knew I'd given it everything and I knew I'd run my perfect race. And so from there, it was a matter of adjusting expectations. And one of the things Dan said is like, look, you're moving pretty well, but let's make sure that no matter what happens, you get finished in under 30 hours. Like, you've run such a good race to this point. Let's make sure you get at least the finisher buckle. Like, you don't want to get this far and not finish the race. And I said, Dan, I appreciate that, but I'm not thinking about 30 hours. I'm thinking about 25 hours. What does it take for us? If I can't break 24, can I break 25 hours? Like, what's it going to take for me to break 25 hours? That's the new goal. And you can think about this as your startup. If you're at 2.5 million in a year, you thought you were going to get to 3, and the probability of getting to 3 is really small. Maybe you're moving into Q3 and you're realizing like, man, I don't think we're going to get to 3 million. It doesn't mean that the year is lost. It just means that maybe you say, okay, well, can we get to 2.75 million? Because that's darn close to 3. And better, can we get to that level of revenue? And meanwhile, can we work on lead generation? Can we work on building the pipeline in Q3 and Q4 so that at Q1 of next year, we can start really strong and start the journey from 3 million, say, to 10 million in the next couple of years. So you got to have those big, hairy, audacious goals and say, we're going to go from 1 million to 3 million this year. And if there's some exogenous factors out of your control, or maybe there's just some things that didn't go exactly the way you needed them to go to get from 1 to 3, then you've got to say, okay, it's all right, but let's keep pushing and let's just, ratchet our expectations, and let's create a new goal that's going to still push us. It's going to keep stretching us, and let's figure out what we can do in order to make the most of the situation that we're in right now. And so as I think about giving it everything and running that perfect race, the last couple things I want to mention on this is that, as later on in the race, after I crossed the river, here's a couple of photos of me crossing the river. So you get down to this place called Rucky Chuck, where you cross across one of the forks of the, I think it's a fork of the American River. It's a pretty shallow river, especially unfortunately because of the lack of rain and snow this year in Northern California. But you still it's about waist deep or more in some places. And so they've got a rope set up, and they've got volunteers sitting, like standing in the river, helping you across to make sure you don't slip or lose your footing or fall on a rock, because it's very rocky across the river. As we're coming into this aid station at Rucky Chuck, I checked my watch, and this is where I got some hope. I was like, Dan, like, we're coming into Rucky Chuck. Now, on my pace card, I wanted to be in Rucky Chuck. I wanted to be there by 11:10 p.m. And I wanted to be across the river and up a 2-mile climb to a place called Green Gate by 12:05, just a little past midnight. Now, I knew I was going to cross the river, and I knew I was going to pick up Jen, my second pacer. And I also knew I'd built in a little bit of time buffer, because I wasn't sure what it was going to take to cross the river. I didn't know how long it was going to take. I needed to change my shoes out, because my shoes are obviously going to be wet, so I needed to stop and change my shoes. There's this 2-mile climb out of the river up to the top of a ridge where the next aid station was going to be. I didn't know how long that was going to take me. I didn't know that was one section of the course I had never run before. And so in my pace card, I built in a little buffer time. And so we're coming into Rucky Chuck. We're coming down to the river, and we can actually, about a half a mile away, we can see the lights, and we can see the aid station. And you can actually hear some clamoring, because it's now almost midnight, so there's not much else. There's not much other ambient noise. It's just people in the aid station cheering and some music playing and stuff like that. And I said to Dan, I checked my watch, and we're coming up to like 11:45, almost midnight, quarter to midnight. And I said, Dan, I don't think I'm quite out of it yet. I think we still got a shot here, because look, if I can get to Green Gate, if I can get across the river and up to Green by 12:30, that gives me 4.5 hours to run the last 20 miles. Now, I've run that section in training at 4:09. I did that section, of course, obviously on fresher legs, but I also didn't run it as hard as I could. I purposely just kind of cruised those 20 miles in a training run, because I wanted to try to simulate, if I was going to be running the actual race, what would my estimated pace be? And I knew in training I'd run that section in 4 hours and 9 minutes. And I thought, well, maybe I got enough left in the tank that I can run that section in 4.5 hours. I'm going to have Jen as a pacer. I know a lot of that section is runnable. I'm still feeling pretty good overall. I mean, we've run 78 miles now, but still, my legs are working, my nutrition's working. I'm not cramping. I'm not having any issues, no injuries. I'm not having any leg problems. And I'm like, it's still a small chance, but maybe there's a chance. So I had this lift, because I kept doing the work. I kept giving it everything, because I didn't go from, I can't break 24 hours to let's just finish in under 30. I kept pushing the pace with Dan. I said, look, if I can't finish in under 24, I want to finish in under 25. And so again, running that perfect race for the situation that I'm in, and still continuing to give it everything. So I checked into Rucky Chuck at 11:47, and I said, Dan, this is going to be a quick goodbye, man. I'm going to hit this river, I'm going to change my shoes, and I want to find Jen on the other side, and I want to keep moving. And he's like, yeah, go for it. Let's go. So we got to the aid station. We very quickly filled up my bottles, gave him a big hug, and down I went into the river and crossing the river. And so that's where I picked up Jen. And this is, again, getting help, asking for help. This was huge for me. And this is, again, another lesson for you, is you've got to find some people that are going to support you and move you and motivate you when you might be feeling a little bit low. And so I crossed the river, and while I was feeling motivated, frankly, I was tired, and I knew we had a 2-mile climb to get to the top of Green Gate. But Jen was fresh. She was ready to run 20 miles. She's a super strong runner. She's a way, way better runner than me. And I thought, I'm not sure, Jen, we're a little behind schedule, but I want to see, let's get to Green Gate. Let's see how quickly we can get up to Green Gate, and then let's evaluate to see if we can still push for sub 24. And so she pushed me. We're going up this hill, and there's places where it's uphill but runnable. She's like, okay, we're going to jog this section. Jog 10 steps. Okay, walk. And I do this thing called 11-7s, where I run 11 breaths, I walk for 7 breaths. Run 11 breaths, walk for 7 breaths, or hike for 7 breaths. And so we actually got to Green Gate, and going back to the pace card and going back to the actual check-in time, we checked into Green Gate at 12:27, and my pace card had me there at 12:05. So now I'm like, okay, I thought I was more than 30 minutes behind schedule, but now I'm down to 22 minutes behind schedule. So we got 20 miles left. If I can, get a minute back per mile, which I know is a huge ask, but you never know. Maybe my body can give me something that I didn't think was there. I can reach down. Maybe on the downhill sections with a pacer, I can move a little bit more quickly. The last couple miles of the race, even though there's some climbing in the last mile or two, if I know I'm that close, I can push myself to run. Maybe, just maybe, it's still, I went from what I thought was 0% chance back to maybe 10% chance. It gave me some hope there. And so as Jen and I hit Green Gate and started on the section, the last 20 miles of the race, one of the things that she did was make sure that I got through these aid stations quickly. So here's some data from my aid station. So one of my aid stations was 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Another was 3 minutes. Another was 43 seconds. We got through an aid station in 43 seconds. The next aid station out was 2 minutes and 35 seconds. So not the 90 seconds I wanted to hit, but still moving through these aid stations pretty quickly. That means I move into an aid station, get my bottles filled, fill up with nutrition, grab some food, and move out of the aid station in under 3 minutes in all of these cases. That's pretty hard to do. Not to mention the fact Jen also has to fill up her stuff. So we're just continuing to give it everything. And it's we're going to keep pushing until, again, it's mathematically impossible for us to get there. And so those last sections of the race, as we're running, through miles, getting into mile 85, 88, coming into mile 90, that's where, again, the pace, I just couldn't chip away at the time fast enough. And that's where I said to Jen, I was like, Jen, it's lost. It's just the reality of it. Because there was a point in our running where we were, around mile 87, 88. We still had 12 miles to go. And going with 12 miles to go, we did the math and we knew, at this point, I was going to have to run 12-minute mile pace for the last 12 miles. And we knew there was a couple of climbs, and we just knew it wasn't going to be possible. And so we said, okay, well, what's it going to take to break 24:30? That became the new perfect race. And so we went after that goal. And then finally, we went into what can we do to just get done, make sure we get done in under 25 hours if I wasn't going to break the 24-hour barrier. So, again, I just want to keep emphasizing to you the importance of celebrating the progress. Give it everything you've got. You've done the preparation, you've done the planning, you've got the product, you're generating sales, you're making progress that you want to make. And just because you don't hit that one benchmark of going from 1 to 3 million doesn't mean that the year is lost. It doesn't mean that you give up, right? You just make those micro adjustments to the outcomes, and you say, what's the best I can make of this situation? What is that perfect race that I can run from this point on? Because the previous time is sunk. Sunk costs are sunk. There's nothing else you can do about it. The only thing you can do is look at marginal gain based on marginal effort. So the cost of that effort relative to the gain that you can get. And so I want to emphasize to you that this is part of communicating with your team as well, and saying, look, team, we're midway through the year. A couple things are going to have to go really good for us to get to 3 million. Maybe we have to find a bluebird opportunity. We're going to have to find some big deal. Maybe we're going to have to find a current customer that's going to double or triple the size of the engagement that we have with them. The chances of those happening, yeah, there's a chance of that happening. Maybe it's 10%. But let's be realistic. Let's make some adjustments. Let's do everything that we can with whatever runway we have left in this year to hit that. Instead of 3 million, maybe it's 2.75. And meanwhile, let's make sure that we don't give up on lead gen. And let's keep making sure that we fill the pipeline to make sure we can start strong in Q1 of next year. So that's why these two lessons are so important to me. You got to give it everything. You got to run your perfect race. The last thing that I want to mention here, going into, actually, you know what? I think, given the time that I spent on those two lessons, this is probably the best place to stop for now. I know you've been listening for a while, and I want to be sensitive to your time as well. as much as I'm enjoying this. I think it'd be better if I just break out the last two lessons, lesson 9 and lesson 10, into one last segment tomorrow. So, or the next installment, the last installment of my post-race startup lessons for the trail. So look, if any or all of this is really hitting home for you, if you're running your startup, you're a startup founder, you're a sales leader, you're looking at where you are in that journey. You're in your own ultra marathon right now. And whether you're on mile 10, mile 30, mile 50 on that journey, and you're looking ahead to the rest of your ultra marathon to get to to that place where you're making an impact for your customers in your market, and you just want to get some help, and maybe it's time to look at finding an expert like me and our team here at SalesQualia. I absolutely just want to encourage you, like, whether or not we're a good fit for each other. Most importantly, I want you to just reach out, because getting that help, asking for help, is something that every startup founder has to get used to doing. And chances are there's a good chance that we can help you. And if we can't help you for whatever reason, then I will do my very best to point you in the absolute right direction. So if you just want to have a quick chat, we can take a look at your situation, do some analysis, brainstorm some ideas, take a look at where you are, what's ahead in that journey for you over the next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. What's that next big checkpoint for you in that ultra marathon, and help you build out a plan of action. From there, we'll be able to figure out if or how we can help you out. Then let's hop on the call. Let's have a quick chat. So again, you can DM me on LinkedIn. You can leave a comment if you're watching this on LinkedIn. Just leave a comment down below that says journey, #journey, and that will signal to me you want to have a quick chat. I'll reach out to you and set up a time. Or just shoot me an email, Scott@SalesQualia, QUALIA.com, Scott@SalesQualia.com. Just type the word journey into the subject line. That'll signal to me and my assistant Jocelyn that you want to have a quick chat about your situation, and we'll see if we can get you on the path to making an impact for your customers, for your market. So, all right, thanks so much for listening to installment post-race startup lessons from the trail, installment number 3. It sounds like we got one more to go with installment number 4 coming very soon. All right, that's it for now. This is Scott Sambucci, Chief Sales Geek and founder over at SalesQualia.